look at that. Our friends are here. Welcome to Friends Talking Nerdy. This is Tim the Nerd, and I am joined by Professor Aubrey. And we are here to wrap up Freedom Month on Friends Talking Nerdy. And we are going to be discussing due process.
Well, that seems like a strange thing to be discussing in Freedom Month.
I mean, we'll go a little bit further into it as we go along here, but I think, in terms of due process being done right by people in positions of power, that can definitely affect someone's mental health, either up or down, if it's done correctly or not.
Totally.
Yeah. But before we dive in, since you were a lawyer and you came at the script I was of the understanding that there would be something legal discussed here. For our friends at home, what is due process?
Well, it's interesting that you ask, and I'm not going to give you a very complicated or citated answer. I think the best answer is due process is the amount that you're entitled to, the amount of process that's due. So due process is you get the amount of process that is due. How do you know how much process is due?
I have no clue. I mean, it depends on, due process in a in a legal matter. I mean, you would want to make sure that the people in positions of power, whether it be, like the police or, the legal side, are, crossing their T's, dotting their I's, and doing everything so that by the end of the day, the person, that is a suspect in a particular instance, for example, is getting the best possible service in that whole process, whether they're guilty of it or not. Ideally, we would want to make sure that everybody, if they do find themselves in a situation to where they are in a legal situation, they're getting a fair shot. And that's my understanding what due process should be.
That's great because you're exactly right. And the idea is if you're going to take someone's life in a capital punishment sense, or you're going to take someone's life by putting them in jail, even restricting their movements, right? We want to ensure that those people have legal representation. The Supreme Court has interpreted our Constitution to say that entitles criminally charged people get a free attorney, and that's where public defense comes from. So the amount of process that's due when they're going to take some part of your life is having an attorney. You're exactly right. But it's other things too. Like you have to get a notice of what you've done wrong. Somebody can't just come get you and put you in jail and never charge you with anything.
Well, I'm sure these days there are some people who disagree with that, but ideally, if
Ideally,
run correctly, yeah.
yeah. I mean, originally,
Yeah.
um, notice the opportunity to be heard, the opportunity to cross-examine witnesses against you, sort of all of those legal protections that we take for granted, but that our people decided were due if you were going to get your life interfered with.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but on the other hand, if you're, say, a residential advisor in a dorm and some of your charges, are doing bad things, if they're going to be excluded from this private college, like say the private college says, hey, the punishment is you're kicked out. There's not a lot of process due the student because it's a private entity. It's not the government that's acting. So that's the other thing about due process is what's the process from the government that's due to the citizen. So that's the general concept.
Indeed, indeed. And, there are definitely some avenues that we could go down. We're not necessarily going to be touching upon it, and, if you go back in the archives, when we've talked about legal stuff before, we've talked about how when you have money, you have access to better prepared attorneys, I should say. I'm not going to knock a public defender, but they have tons more cases that they have to be at compared to someone who's working for a big name company or a big name law firm or something like that. Which doesn't mean they don't put in the work either, but you get my point. It's if you got more money, you got access to more legal services.
I mean, I think that's a decent way to put it. I think it's, public. There are many in Portland. There are many excellent public defenders that people should be happy that they're getting. Some people feel like they're not going to get the same quality of service from a public defender versus a private attorney that they pay. But that's like I go to Saks Fifth Avenue because a scarf there costs $300. Instead of going to a smaller local store where you could have gotten that for, say, $50, you feel like it's higher quality, but it's actually probably not any different in quality. Like, yeah, I get you can tell the difference between cashmere and merino wool. There are some things that are just more luxurious, but I can pay tons of money for something that I could get off brand that works just as well, that does the same things for much less money. And why wouldn't I do that?
And to your point, you don't want to let anecdotal stories like O.J. Simpson, for example, or Vince Neil in the '80s, who Vince Neil, the lead singer of Motley Crue, was driving while really high and drunk with a friend of his, got into a car crash, and his friend died.
Mm.
And if Vince Neil worked at a department store, he would have been in jail for a long time. Whereas because he was Vince Neil, the lead singer of Motley Crue at the height of their fame, I believe he only spent like a couple of days in jail and had a really large fine, probation, and all that stuff. But that is still an anecdotal story compared to what it is like for everybody else. Because yeah, there are some lawyers that you could pay a lot of money for, and they can find ways to get you off or whatever. But
I mean, there's good lawyers, and you don't have. I think there are great public defenders. That's all I'm going to say is that people shouldn't rush to judgment about the quality of the work that you get from a public defender. You just are not paying for it, and you're lucky.
yeah, yeah, to be clear, like well, I have already said, that they do tend to be overworked compared to somebody at like a law firm or something like that. That does not diminish the effort or the passion that they have to do what they do, because a lot of those people understand that they could probably make a lot more money being the type of lawyer that you see like on the back of a bus billboard. But they want to be there to help the average person who doesn't really have the access to like your F. Lee Bailey or Johnny Cochran type of lawyer or something.
Right.
Yeah. Now, have you ever noticed how quickly people decide they know the whole story? Somebody gets arrested, a headline pops up, a 30-second video goes viral. Within minutes, people have already picked a side. Guilty, innocent, hero, villain. It's almost like our brains hate waiting for more information. Today, we're going to be diving further into due process, like we mentioned, but not primarily from a legal perspective. We're asking a psychological question here. Why do human beings rush to judgment long before all the facts are available? Because due process isn't just a courtroom idea, it's a challenge to one of our brain's oldest instincts. Now, when you hear the words due process, what comes to mind for you?
Well, I mean, I think it's the opposite of what you're saying because basically, before we jump to a conclusion or take action against somebody, we should follow a fair and structured process to make sure we're getting things right, right? If you rush to judgment, you don't give room for the person to defend themselves or for the plaintiff to prove their case. So, giving people a chance to explain themselves, looking at the evidence and the facts, and not making the decision based on assumptions or first impressions. That the idea of a third party neutral decision maker is an important part of due process. And so we ultimately, in the legal sense, it's about fairness and making sure that decisions of governmental agents, judges, elected officials aren't arbitrary or not supported by evidence. But it's also good to think about things that way every day too, because something might happen that triggers us to tell a story in our head about how that person must hate me, right? And that's my initial rush to judgment. That's going to limit my ability to engage with that person. And that's going to make it more difficult. It's going to make my life more difficult. So I've got to say, okay, that's just a rush to judgment. Does this person have they ever actually done anything to demonstrate that they hate me? The answer is no. You sort of reframe things.
Yeah, and I think the key point there, as you mentioned, is about fairness. Like, you hear stories like, let's bring up Bill Cosby here. There was enough information out in the public, thanks to like reporting or previous court cases, that by the time he initially went to jail for doing what he did, you were like, yeah, he's not a good person. However, we ended up finding out after the fact that the district attorney in question ended up breaking some rules to be able to get that conviction, and it sucked, but that's fair because we don't want to fall into that situation to where you have that rush to judgment thinking that person's guilty, let's put them away, because we want to make sure that the legal system, in this particular instance, is doing its job, because if it's not doing its job for a guilty person, it's probably not doing a job for someone who's innocent as well. And there are tons and tons of stories over many, many, many years about innocent people who got put away, behind bars for many, many years for something they just did not do.
Oh, absolutely. And that's even in the context of what I consider, you're looking at systems around the world. I consider ours to be to give a lot of protection to people and keeping things fair.
Well, there we go. There we go. Now, and I think that's why this topic fascinated me. People often think due process exists because lawyers enjoy paperwork. Is that true?
Probably.
Okay.
I mean, if you think back, these were the times when you wrote with a quill and an ink pen. And George Washington had that weird thing that attached four pens together, and he would write with the one pen, and the other three pens would write the same thing so that he could sign four things at the same time because he was so busy signing things.
Well, there you go. Yeah, he did what Bart Simpson used to do when he was writing on the
Oh,
chalkboard.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But anyway, the deeper reason here is much more interesting. Due process exists because human beings aren't naturally objective. If we were, we wouldn't need so many safeguards in the first place. Now imagine this. You open your phone during lunch, someone has been arrested, there's one blurry photo, one sensational headline, thousands of comments. Half the internet has already convicted them. The other half insists they're completely innocent. Nobody actually knows much yet, but everyone feels absolutely certain. Why? Now, what do you think's happening inside our brains that makes uncertainty so uncomfortable in situations like that?
Well, I think that in all cases, we have to look back to see where things came from and why we do them now, because most of them have nothing to do with what's happening now. And that's the case with uncertainty as well, because our brains evolved to predict what happens next. We had to be able to do that to survive. So, not knowing whether a rustle in the bushes was the wind or a predator was more dangerous than making a quick guess. So, it comes from being a prey animal, right? Having to develop those sorts of senses. Our brains often treat uncertainty as something to reduce as quickly as possible. So we think we'll survive, and surely it's been proven that we survived better when we guessed what was happening, as opposed to standing there and waiting to see what was happening. And I could just imagine like little cavemen. Something's about to happen. One runs away and the other's just kind of confused. The one that's confused is going to get rolled over by the giant boulder that's always rolling down the hill in the jungle, and
Yeah.
the other one's going to run away.
Yeah, Steve in Cave 76. He had to run away really fast. But and that is the thing too about due process, because on the one hand, when it comes to like if you're out in the wild, for instance, the uncertainty that there may be bears that might attack you is one thing, and having that uncertainty, yeah, you want to put that at ease to make sure there are no bears to attack you. But you don't want to have that rush of judgment when it comes to something as important as a legal proceeding. Whether you think the person is guilty or innocent or not, you don't want to just have that blanket, they're guilty, just off of nothing. There are plenty of court
Right.
cases.
Even eyewitness reports, right? Like people say, I saw Tim smack the old lady. I saw it with my own eyes.
She deserved it. No.
But it's possible to see things differently than they actually existed in reality.
I got an example.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the second time I was robbed at a gas station. And the guy came in, he had a BB gun and everything, but I'm not taking a pea shooter in the face over somebody else's money. That is an employer, they got insurance, it'll be covered. So they did their thing. So they got the money, the guy ran out, got into his truck. This is when I was working third shift, and as they were pulling out, I saw that the truck was mostly white, and I said to the officers in question when they came to get my statement and all that, that there was some black trim.
Uh-huh.
Later, after they arrested a suspect and brought in the truck in question to the police station, I was able to go there and look at the truck. It was a mostly white truck with red trim.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Yes.
to your point, witnesses are not necessarily reliable when you are, especially in the case of being robbed. In the case, I wasn't scared for my life, but it was still a really tense situation. And, you tend to miss things.
Mm-hmm.
Witnesses are not reliable. And I
So
think that,
think about that in the context of relationship, like because all those things are also true. You are under stress, you're having a conversation, you're going to perceive things in one way that may have nothing to do with reality. And so you end up with two people who are doing that. Nobody knows what's going on. And so there's a lot of angst about something that no one understands. And, you know, when you break up with someone, it's always this question of, well, I need closure. I need to talk to them again, even though they broke up with me, even if they were mean to me in breaking up with me. I still want to meet with them so that I can understand why they broke up with me, so that I can improve myself in the future. Like, really?
can I get a reference for a future relationship?
Right? But that's the same need for cognitive closure, that same need for knowing something.
Yeah, and to your point, the need for cognitive closure is an idea that psychologists talk about. Most of us don't enjoy uncertainty. Our brains prefer an answer, even an incomplete one, to having no answer at all. In other words, I don't know yet is surprisingly difficult for most people. Now, is this something that helped humans survive? And I think you've already touched upon that with Steve from Cave 76.
Yeah, for real. And, the idea is if I know it, even if it's bad, it's better than some thing I don't know. And that it recurs over and over and over again in all the stories that we tell ourselves.
How do you think social media makes this tendency even stronger? I mean, for me, I think it makes it to where people are much more likely to, jump onto a bandwagon of guilty or not guilty if we're talking about a legal case online. People already have their minds made up of someone's intentions on social media without taking the time to really dive in.
Yep. And sometimes there are patterns that we can see in the facts that we then see in the facts, if you know what I mean. Like the pattern might be, oh, it was brown or it was white with black trim, but the reality was this other thing.
Yeah,
And you would then be looking for a white car with black trim. You wouldn't be looking for the reality of the red trim. And this is what we do when we forage. If you're looking around in the forest for food, you're looking at patterns of the forest and you want to put them in some kind of order so you can find the food. And you have a whole repository of these are the kinds of places where I find this kind of food. And those patterns are what make it so that you can survive, so that you're eating.
indeed. Indeed. Now, research by psychologist Ari Kruglansky and Donna Webster found that people with a stronger need for cognitive closure tend to make decisions faster and become more resistant to changing their minds once they've reached a conclusion. That's not because they're unintelligent, it's because certainty itself feels rewarding. Now, do you think that's one reason it's become so hard for people to admit they were wrong about anything?
It must be psychologically rewarding, you know, it must be the rat presses the button with their nose, they get something that they want. So that's got to be what's happening.
And I get that. There are times to where, like on the show, for instance, I may have said of something that I thought was a fact that turned out later to be the case, and based on how someone else may have presented that to me, there have been times to where my first instinct was, well, fuck you, you know. But that doesn't mean that they were necessarily wrong, if that makes sense. It,
Yeah,
it
this does not surprise me at all.
but but still, though, it's something that we all have to face, really, because yeah, we do crave that certainty in life. And if we are feel 100% certain about a particular answer, and then we're told that no, maybe if you look at it in a different way it could be X instead of Y, then I can understand why the brain would be resistant to that. And I think part of growing up and part of evolving as a human being is doing your best to fight against that, which doesn't mean that you flip flop on everything and and instantly agree with someone else and be like, oh, you're right, I was totally wrong, but you
It's
should be.
like everything can't be decided on a hypothetical. Like you actually have to know the facts matter.
Yeah,
So it's not okay to just make up some straw man argument and say this is why this happened when that's not at all the facts.
indeed. Now, that makes me wonder if we've actually started rewarding certainty more than accuracy. Being first often seems more important than being right. I mean, if we take a look at, the actions of politicians, for instance, we have already determined that politician A, if they generally support causes that we don't support, that politician A must be a mustache twirling villain, right? And there are legitimate mustache twirling villains in politics today. I'm not denying that, but our brains want to make it to where we when we think of politicians on the opposing side of a view, that they must be bad. And that level of certainty makes it to where the rancor that you see, like in social media, for instance, when people are talking about politics, it adds more gasoline to the fire, because a lot of times there is nuance there. There are times to where someone could have an equally compelling reason to vote a different way than you that isn't necessarily a bad thing, if that makes sense. An example I brought up in previous episodes is like school vouchers, for instance. That's not like supporting like human sacrifice or anything like that. It's a different take. Now, I don't support school vouchers or anything like that, but taking the time to actually hear someone out about why they support it allowed me to be able to say, okay, I kind of get your point. I still don't agree with it, but it allowed me to be able to.
See that the other person was reasonable.
Reasonable, yes, and yeah, I was able to walk away not, walk away with a better understanding, and it's like I didn't let my certainty of my viewpoint prevent me from hearing somebody else out, and I think that's something we don't
I
see a lot.
I wonder if there are two kinds of people, and those are the people that on Jeopardy hit the button no matter what. They don't even listen to the whole question before they hit the button. And then there are the people that wait to hear the question until they know the answer to hit the button. And it's kind of like this. Like there are people who don't are you seem incapable of listening to other people. They can do is try to convince other people that they're right.
Yeah, now to be clear, obviously there are villains in this world, and there are times to where you're going to be certain that the actions of somebody is a bad thing, and that is not wrong to go off and proclaim. If you have someone that a politician, for instance, that is taking away like lots of like natural like the land on national parks and giving it to like private companies to cut down the trees or take the oil out or do whatever, that is bad. Or let's say the data center thing, it's like here at Friends Talking Nerdy, we're not exactly against AI in any way, shape, or form, but there are legitimate reasons that when it comes to stuff like data centers that these use that we want to be able to at least figure out the environmental impact of before we start giving permits and stuff left and right. It's like there are things to where certainty is the appropriate response, but I think too often, especially when it comes to like social media, it rewards the instant response and not necessarily the nuanced response.
Right. And then the instant response is comes to us from places, right? It comes to us from conversations, the things we hear. And if we're engaging with certain kinds of people or certain types of media, we end up with what's called confirmation bias.
Well, there you go. Now maybe due process isn't just a legal protection. Maybe it's society's way of reminding us that our first instinct isn't always our best judgment. But rushing to judgment isn't the only thing our brains do. Once we've decided what we think, we start looking for evidence that proves we're right. And that's where things become even more interesting. One of the things we've been talking about is how uncomfortable uncertainty can be. But here's something that fascinates me. Once our brains settle on an answer, they don't stop working. They start acting like attorneys. Not attorneys trying to discover the truth, attorneys trying to win the case. Now, have you ever caught yourself looking for evidence to support something you already believed?
Oh, absolutely. And but I got to take issue with something you said, which was you said your brain starts acting like an attorney, not one that's trying to discover the truth, but one that's trying to win the case. And in our legal system, those are the same thing because what we say is you can discover the truth through adversarial conflict with a third party decision maker. And so trying that attorney trying to win using the best arguments is actually what is powering our legal system. So I think there is a way of looking at it where pursuing something to ends, really getting into something because that's what we believe in. There are going to be people on the other side, and out of that is probably going to come some compromised position in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, it's it could have been a little more nuanced in how I wrote that because I think of like defense attorneys, for instance. Defense attorneys want to win the case for their client. They're not going to ask their client if their client is actually guilty of the crime or not. They're going to use the evidence that is being provided by the state or that the client themselves are able to bring in their own defense to win the case. And yeah, as a lawyer, you want to win the cases because you believe in those cases. you would hope. I mean, and yeah, I understand it's also a job too, in that, sometimes you're, taking on a case that you're not necessarily passionate about, but it's something that you just do because that's what you're paid to do. But, to your point, yeah, a little more nuance in that than how I run it.
Yeah, and you absolutely have to be willing to take clients that you don't agree with. Or you need to work in a nonprofit that only serves certain types of clients.
Indeed. Now, back to the question. Have you ever caught yourself looking for evidence to support something you already believed?
Yeah, I'd say I do this at work a lot, you know? I make assumptions about a lot about what people think about me. I mean, work is a place where I'm already feeling things like imposter syndrome, and it's easy to think that I'm not doing as good a job as I should be. And then I interpret everything anyone does as them identifying some flaw with me instead of anything that I actually would be true. Like they have to go pick up their daughter in 5 minutes, or they've had a really bad day, or that's just how they communicate. They don't mean anything by it, if you know what I mean. But if I've already decided that they don't like me, every time I see them, my brain will pick out something that demonstrates that they don't like me, because it's possible to interpret behavior in many different ways. So somebody might be, not engaging me in conversation because they feel like I'm feeling shy. And so they may feel like they're being nice, but in fact, it feels like, oh, they don't like me. They're not talking to me like I'm a normal person. And just everything can be twisted, and your mind is doing the twisting. So it depends on how twisted you are.
Quite twisted, yes. And I've been guilty of that before myself too, especially when it comes to like relationship stuff at work, or just with people in general. Like if you believe in your head that something is true, then you're gonna believe it's true. And it will take a lot of work to make you, take the time to dive a little deeper and to kind of see the nuance of the situation. Now when it comes to like relationship stuff, it's also possible that it's an oil and water situation. Not everybody's meant to be friends, not everybody is meant to have happy experiences with each other. Sometimes people just rub each other the wrong way, and it's best that they have no interaction. That is fine. But it's, I think
It's
everybody.
those people that you are friends with because they're friends with your friend. You're like, I never would have even met you if I wasn't friends with Katie.
Yeah, thanks, Katie.
And sometimes that's great, and sometimes it's terrible.
Indeed. Now, again, I know I've done it, like I said, but I wasn't doing it because I was trying to be dishonest. I was doing it because, well, believe it or not, I'm human. We've had over 470 plus episodes now to prove that. There's actually a name for this tendency, and you've already talked about it here briefly. It's called confirmation bias. That doesn't mean we ignore every piece of evidence that disagrees with us. It means we're naturally better at noticing, remembering, and believing information that fits what we already think. Now, imagine you're convinced a coworker doesn't like you, using your example. Then one morning they walk past without saying hello. Immediately your brain goes, "See? I knew it." But maybe they were running late. Maybe they had a rough morning. Maybe they simply didn't see you. Once we formed a belief, our minds become remarkably good at collecting evidence that supports it while overlooking perfectly reasonable alternative explanations. So, is confirmation bias really about intelligence, or is it something almost all of us experience?
Well, I think it's something that almost all of us experience. There are people who are skeptical. I guess I'd say more skeptical people is what it's about. Or how skeptical are you? More skeptical people are willing to interrogate things before they just believe them. And people who are what was the word I was just talking about?
Skeptical people.
Skeptical people. People who are gullible are not that skeptical. They're the ones that jump to conclusions.
Indeed, indeed, and again, to be clear, I think this is something that all of us are, for lack of a better phrase, guilty of experiencing at some point. Which is why we have, for people that do want to keep up with the news, echo chambers and everything, because you have a certain worldview, and you're naturally going to seek out voices that agree with that worldview.
I think sometimes. I think most people have experienced it like once in their lives, kind of thing. Like I think very few people experience that with everything that they consume.
Well, one of the classic demonstrations came from psychologist Peter Watson in the 1960s when it comes to confirmation bias. Participants were given a simple rule to figure out. Most people tried to prove their first guess was correct instead of trying to prove it wrong. Ironically, the fastest way to find the right answer would have been actively looking for evidence that challenged their assumptions. Instead, many people search for confirmation. It's a pattern researchers have found in all kinds of situations, from everyday decision making to politics, relationships, and even scientific research. And I think back to the 2000s during the Iraq War, and you had tons of people that were protesting and, giving that old standard argument of, the politicians want to send us to war, but they're not going to send their kids to war.
Mhm.
However, the fact that in this country, thanks to Richard Nixon, I mean, where credit's due, we'll give credit where credit's due here. He ended the draft and essentially made the military a government career option. And it was kind of a disingenuous argument in the 2000s of people, stating that George Bush wouldn't let his kids go to war, but he's going to send my kids to war. It's like the military. It's just, what I had to figure out was that, the military is now a choice for people. If George Bush's kids wanted to enter the military and be involved in the war in, any way, shape, or form that they felt that they could, then that was their choice. Just like, politicians today, we can bring up the Iran situation. If politicians' kids today, if they choose to go in the military and support it, that's their choice. If not, that is not their choice. And it was that thought in the 2000s that really started the snowball of making me question, you know, just how much I was being affected by the news, and going along with the confirmation bias. It made me real. It was the first one of the first things that made me realize just how much a part of the echo chamber I was becoming, and how much I had to fight against that.
Yeah, and I think that's process and that's skill as opposed to what you believe or what you think you know, right? If you're the person who looks at it and sees it on the website and immediately says, "I'm gonna find out if this is true or not. Let me go check and see." That's that skeptical person who is gonna find the correct answer. People who see that and come to that conclusion without even considering another point of view. And I run into this myself, and have done so in my work too, where I'll get a brief from the opposing side, so an argument that they have supported with case law and stuff, and I'll read it, and I feel immediately like we're gonna lose. Like they have just convinced me that we're gonna lose. And it takes me going back and looking at my notes and reading the cases again to be like, "Oh, I see what they're doing." And that's not true. Very often, because I was often in litigation with the government, very often it was like, "No, they're just saying things that aren't true."
What? That happens? The
Yeah,
government does that? Wow.
yes.
I also think too, like social media, like we mentioned, does reward confidence over curiosity, because the example I brought up of people that were protesting about politicians kids not going to war, if I had gone on social media and pointed that out, I would have been shunned. I would have been, you're one of them. You must support the it's people want to be right, and people unfortunately want to be flag bearers on social media for the causes they believe in. And 240 characters, depending on the social media outlet of your choice, is not going to be enough to really dive into the nuance of a particular topic.
I mean, I seriously blame social media. I blame the internet itself. Because if you think back, we remember things before the internet.
In the before times,
In the
yes.
before times, the long, long ago. I remember you had to consult reliable sources to even get any information. It was like, how do I find the data on this? Well, I got to go to the public library and look at a reference book from a well respected publisher. Whereas when we have the internet, we get to look at everything any human ever said about that topic, whether they know anything about the topic or not.
Yes,
So
and
that's the same thing as social influencers, right? Like,
yeah,
what
and
secret information do they have? None. They just make choices and act like those choices are correct when really they're completely subjective.
or take the people that are against like vaccines or whatnot, that love the RFK Jr. type of people out there. And the reason the RFK Jr. type of people, or the Jenny McCarthy's of the world, were popular, is that they were confident in what they were saying, even though what they were saying was bullshit.
Hmm.
And people taking the time to actually point out that bullshit online were, ridiculed by the people that wanted to believe this. Like, also too, like, there's this doctor I follow on Facebook that does these great reels of pointing out stupidity from social media influencers. Like, they will have a little short video of an influencer like pointing out like one ingredient in like baby formula or something like that,
Uh-huh.
and the influencer would be like, you don't want to give your kids this because it has this one ingredient, and then the doctor will come back and be like, No, you're fine, and here's why you're fine, and then give a detailed reason why they're fine. But again, you have people that will believe the confidence of the initial social media person. And like, there was one, she even pointed out, one guy who was a chiropractor who was talking about an ingredient in formula. It's like, what?
The whole fluoride thing.
Yeah.
The whole fluoride thing, as an environmental person, as an environmentalist, that was huge because the people who believe that fluoride is made from toxic waste and is unhealthy are always going to be fighting with the people who think that fluoride is what has saved their teeth. Like, there's just never the twain shall meet. It's just like vaccines or whatever, where people just take a position and they don't really care about science.
Yeah, yeah, and everything has to be a fight to the death type of thing. There could be no nuance, no, you know, no even,
No way to even say, "Let me think about that," or "I'm not sure."
or maybe you got a point on this, and we can do X, Y, and Z to protect against this. But the fact that it helps everybody, 95% of the people, yeah, people support the confidence. Now, I think that's one reason due process matters so much. A courtroom doesn't just ask what evidence supports this. Ideally, it also asks what evidence doesn't. What haven't we considered? What if our first impression is wrong? That's a completely different way of thinking than how our brains naturally operate. Now, the interesting thing here is you don't have to be on a jury for this to matter. Think about friendships, family disagreements, arguments online, even deciding whether someone is trustworthy. We're constantly making judgments based on incomplete information. The question isn't whether we'll form opinions, we all do. The question is whether we're willing to revise those opinions when new information comes along. Now, what do you think makes it so difficult for people to change their minds? Is it about facts, or is it about identity?
I mean, I think for a lot of people it is identity, because you think about who are the people who are most adamant about things, and it's religious people.
And religious people.
and religious people. Like, they're the ones who will not believe any actual facts when you talk to them about issues. They because God said, and this is interesting because this is a source of law throughout human history, has been religion. We often look to things we've made up to guide our behavior. And I don't know why people, as a skeptic, I don't know why people haven't seen through that for generations and generations and generations.
Because too, adding on to that point, let's take, when it comes to religion, the topic of abortion. You have a number of religious people that will be vehemently against abortion. Now, to be clear, that is their choice. If they are adults and choose not to have an abortion, that is on them. Good for them. That is their choice. However, there are, one, I don't like the fact that those people tend to want to legislate their beliefs on people, but two, because of this weird thing, since that douchebag Jerry Falwell back in the 70s did the Christian Coalition thing, the idea that Christians are just one big, huge lump and don't all have different beliefs or everything like that. There are plenty of denominations out there that have no issue with abortion. There are even like Jewish people, for instance, have no issue with abortion, and believes that a baby is a baby once they're out, and everything like that. So when it comes to stuff like religion, yeah, I get your point. Yeah, people that are Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, will that is their identity. They're not going to listen and try to think of a nuance of an answer that disagrees with what they believe. But even then, depending on the type of religious sect we're talking about, they don't all agree.
Sure. But it's not just religion, it's also just people who are really passionate about a topic. Like, if you have one topic that you organize your life around, you're probably one of those people.
And she's pointing at you.
Right? Like, these are people who cannot stand ambiguity. They can't stand knowing that two things can exist at the same time. That their love does not have to be evil, and something that is bad doesn't always, well, I don't know what the other part of that is, but
But at the end of the day, it's like, when it comes to a religious person, if they want to think like a certain somebody is bad based on what they do in their life, that is their choice. I have no issue with that, even though I may not agree with that. I think the problem comes, to your point, when they try to force the other people to believe what they believe. And that's been the big thing with religion, since day one, pretty much.
yep.
Yeah. Now, maybe the real strength here, though, isn't having the fastest opinion. Maybe it's having the confidence to say, I learned something new. Now, of course, changing our minds gets even harder when our beliefs become part of who we are. And that's where psychology moves beyond individual thinking into identity. Because sometimes we're not defending an idea, we're defending ourselves. I think we've reached the point where due process becomes more than a legal idea here. It becomes a very personal one because once a belief becomes part of our identity, changing our minds isn't just intellectually difficult, it can feel emotionally threatening. Now, have you ever noticed how two people can look at the exact same event and walk away with completely different conclusions?
Yeah, a lot. I'm a skeptic and a pessimist. So I don't know whether that makes me chaotic evil or chaotic good, but I'm pretty sure I'm chaotic. Anyway, um, and it's someone who is an optimist and who looks on the bright side would experience the exact same thing that I walk away saying, "Oh my god, that was terrible." Is the one that a positive person would walk away saying, "Well, I didn't get all the way I wanted to get, but I did get these things." it just and that builds upon itself. So I think people who have a positive attitude are, it's a better thing to be someone who's positive rather than someone who's negative. Because if you think it's just like confirmation bias, right? If you think everything's going to be terrible, everything's going to be terrible.
Agreed. I think let's take our political environment here in the United States as an example. You can have people that think that the actions of the people currently in the White House are leading us down a very dangerous road. And it is. I'm not denying that. But you also do have people that will kind of think more long term, think of the long game, if that makes sense, in terms of seeing like some of the decisions of the courts in the country that are responding positively to some of these negative actions that are occurring. And it's like I get both sides. I get how someone could see what's happening on the news and think the absolute worst case scenario is happening in this country, but I can also see the logic in someone stating that this is bad, but this is also happening to kind of counteract that and keep it from spreading and becoming much worse, so it will sort itself out. And some people, when it comes to like the political situation in the country that we're currently facing, some people don't necessarily want to hear that second option.
Yeah, I think it can be hard to believe that people are going to change their minds.
Yeah. Now, that's one of the things psychology has taught me when it comes to stuff like due process in everything we've talked about today. We like to think we gather facts first and build our beliefs afterward, but often it's the other way around. Sometimes our identities quietly shape which facts we're willing to accept, not because we're trying to deceive ourselves, but because our brains are trying to stay consistent. Now, think about being a sports fan. I'll even throw professional wrestling into that, folks. Imagine your favorite team or professional wrestler commits a questionable foul late in a championship game. If you're cheering for that team, you might say the referee got it right. If you're rooting for the other side, that's one of the worst calls I've ever seen. Same replay, same evidence, different conclusions, and neither fan usually thinks they're being unfair. Now,
And we have invested so much in sports ball in trying to make that decision fair, right? We've now got replay of the play, and then there's like a challenge to the replay.
depending on the sport, yeah.
It's like there's a challenge to the call that gets a replay, and then there's a challenge to the replay that gets a second replay or something like that. Like it's a long administrative process, and how deeply we have to get into that to feel like it's fair enough.
Yeah, because it can suck. Like if you're a fan of sports and everything. Like I remember, in I think it was 1990 or 91 when the University of Michigan made it to the finals of March Madness, the 64 team basketball tournament, and the very last thing that happened, one of the last things that happened was Chris Webber ended up calling a timeout when his team didn't have a timeout, so that resulted in allowing the other team to shoot some free throws that allowed them to win the game.
Yeah,
And, like,
that'll happen.
yeah, like if you were a supporter of Michigan, that crushed you. If you were a supporter of the other team, you were like, yes, USA. So I definitely get that. Now, why does identity have such a powerful influence in how we interpret information?
Well, if we weren't a part of a group, we would be at a much at disadvantage in our ability to survive. Humans are pack animals. We can't live solo. Like it's very hard. You have to be incredibly skilled to be able to live by yourself in a prehistoric world, right? So being part of the group is really important, and people choose which groups they belong to. Like I identify with being a goth. That's part of the reason that I'm negative all the time, and or I'm negative all the time because I'm a goth. And that when I'm like, oh man, I'm being super negative, and I'm like, oh yeah, just gothy. just being gothy, and it sort of encourages me to continue that behavior because I admire goth culture.
Yeah, yeah, you,
Or like now I identify as a burner because I like burner culture. And the people who don't like burners don't like burner culture. It's not they don't like the people. They don't like the culture around it.
I get that, and I mean, we've also brought up the religious example, we've brought up the political example, we've brought up the sports example. Sports, especially depending on where you are in the country, like Texas loves them some football,
Oh yeah.
some high school football and all that. And depending on, where they live, one team is going to be the absolute best and they're going to wear the jersey. They're going to have the stickers on their car. They're going to, listen to the games whenever they can. It is about their identity. And, it's going to make them harder to, accept the fact that maybe their coaches are allowing the players to do stuff that gets them in trouble or something like that, or whatever. They want to continue to support that team no matter what. And I think that's where the problem can come in, is that you get so focused on your identity, like you, as a burner, for example. And obviously this is not you, but I'm sure there are burners that will be completely oblivious to the negatives that people have about the burner culture and whatnot, and will completely disregard any sort of negative talk about it because it would affect their identity. Whereas I feel confident in stating for you that you love that culture. You can't wait to go. You're going to be going here within a matter of couple of weeks here yourself for Burning Man 2026. But I think you also understand that there are legitimate concerns that could make it to where someone would not want to be a burner.
Oh, absolutely. And if you are a member of a group and you are defend that group automatically, no matter what it is that you've seen them do, that is problematic. Like burner culture includes people who don't follow the burner culture and throw garbage out the window as they're driving around in the desert or
Or Grover fucking Norquist as a burner. Like the
or
documentary.
that
So
dude that Elon Musk's brother
yeah, it's a gathering, man. No,
to gathering.
but yeah,
But you know what I'm saying? Like, but I look at that and I say, well, they're acting against the culture. They're acting against the principles. They're not accepting other people, for example. They're not acting like burners, and so I want to distance myself from them, ostracizing them from the group, which encourages them not to be that way. Encourages them to be more positively social as opposed to antisocial.
yes, now and now in fact you do have a cowbell, and when you go to Burning Man, you're going to be finding those people and pointing at them and ringing the cowbell and going shame, shame.
It's been done.
Okay. Now, there's a concept called motivated reasoning. It's the tendency to use our reasoning skills not just to discover what's true, but to defend conclusions we already want to believe. Now, ironically, being smarter doesn't necessarily protect us from this. Sometimes it just makes us better at building arguments for positions we've already chosen. Researchers have found that when people evaluate evidence tied to topics they care deeply about, they often scrutinize information that challenges their beliefs much more harshly than information that supports them. In other words, our critical thinking doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it becomes selective. And again, I understand that. I've been guilty of that myself. Okay, because it can feel like, in your mind, you're like losing a part of yourself if, through your research on a counter argument on something you believe in, you discover that maybe there's a valid point in that counter argument.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got to that if we can, in our interactions with each other, turn toward curiosity rather than defensiveness, that would help. It's hard not to do. Like as an environmentalist, people who do things against the environment, I'm like they're evil, very black and white. But I accept I live here in this culture. I consume things from this culture, right? I benefit from the culture in which I live. And so I can't sit here and say I'm above all of that because I'm not. I'm part of the system that creates environmental problems.
Yeah, and kind of
So there's compromise everywhere.
yeah, and I think if we want to, talk a little bit about, like data centers again, it's like data centers aren't a new thing. They've been around for a long time. It's just with AI becoming more prevalent in our society, more and more of them are opening up to kind of take to kind of work towards meeting the demand that people are having of AI. And in and of itself, in theory, I don't think that's a bad thing. Now, you could definitely have some major arguments as to why cities and states are just so willing to hand the keys over to people to do essentially whatever they want when it comes to data centers in terms of using all the power and being so environmentally bad. And because there are plenty of examples out there of people that live near data centers that when you turn on the water faucet, it looks like chocolate milk coming out.
Yep.
And that is something, that again does need to be addressed. That doesn't mean AI in and of itself is a bad thing, but if we are going to use this tool, we need to use it in a way to where people aren't dying.
We need to use it in a way that solves our storage problem, right? Because data centers exist because everything that we create has to live somewhere. And when we upload it to Amazon or we have it in our Google Docs, that is living on a computer in Idaho in the middle of nowhere in a Brussels sprout farm in a really disturbing way where it's like all of a sudden there's huge industrial facility that is the data center. So we've got to figure out a way that people can have information, and either we cut down the amount of information that people can have because people have a ridiculous amount of information. Like I have emails from 20 years ago, perhaps 30, on my computer. This is terrible. So we've got to use the AI to figure out the storage problem. Then we can have, robots that kill us like Terminator.
Yeah. Now, one thing I've tried to remind myself is that changing my mind doesn't erase who I was yesterday. It means I learned something today. And that's an important distinction. This isn't just about news stories or courtrooms. Think about a disagreement with a spouse. We've touched upon relationships here. A misunderstanding with a friend, something that happens at work. How often do we spend more energy defending our first interpretation than trying to understand someone else's? Which makes it not a legal issue, it makes it a human issue. Now, what do you think helps people stay curious instead of becoming defensive? For me, for me, I guess it would be that trying to have that reminder in your head that maybe I'm not right. Maybe I'm not right. Is there a different side to this? Is there a different way of looking at this? Depending on the particular
But how
issue.
do you do that? And I think you do that by being a good listener. So if you're not able to be curious about something, it's probably because when you started listening, you thought one thing and they said one thing that made you think they were not on your side, and you've been waiting to argue with them. You haven't even heard anything they've said because you've just been waiting to argue with them. And so you gotta take that moment to actually listen to what people are saying, and often you will find more common ground.
Yeah, yeah. It's like I keep on harping on, through multiple episodes, the fact of the matter is that the average person on the street, no matter where you are in the United States, 9 times out of 10 generally agree on more than they disagree on when it comes to like political issues, for instance, and
The actual policies,
the actual policies.
just demonstrating that nobody knows what the actual policies are. They
Yeah.
don't feel they need to know. They're like, Rachel Maddow said it, so that must be my opinion.
Yeah, or yeah, or somebody else. So in a way, it's kind of fighting against that because that can also kind of keep away that us versus them mentality that I think is really, really dangerous in this country and has led to countless people being hurt and killed. You know, this whole us versus them, like as we record this, I believe it was yesterday, the guy who broke into the house of the Minnesota state politicians and executed them got life in prison. Thankfully so, thank goodness. But, that guy did what he did because of the increasing rancor we're seeing in politics today. He didn't view them as human beings that maybe he just disagreed with and, living in their state could, work towards supporting a different candidate to maybe get into that office. He thought they needed to die, and that yeah, it should go without saying that is a dangerous attitude to have when it comes to a political opinion or anything like that. But we I think it helps fight against us versus them, and yeah, I think that's important.
It is real important. I love us versus them. I love getting all mad about stuff and blaming other people. And
Yeah, fuck shit up.
it's good to be a radical. It's fun to be a radical. Fuck shit up.
Yeah. Now, maybe due process isn't about giving someone else a fair hearing. Maybe it's about giving ourselves enough time to question our own first impressions. So, if our brain naturally rushes to conclusions, if confirmation bias keeps us there, and if identity makes those conclusions even harder to let go, then the next question almost asks itself: can we actually train ourselves to think differently, or are we simply wired that way? That's where I'd like to go next. So, we've been talking about something that sounds a little discouraging. Our brains crave certainty. We look for evidence that confirms what we already believe. Our identities can make changing our minds feel uncomfortable. And at this point, someone might be thinking, well, are we just stuck like that? Thankfully, psychology gives us a much more hopeful answer. Now, I'll ask you, do you think people can actually become better thinkers, or are these tendencies just part of being human?
Oh, I don't think it's hardwired at all. I think that we absolutely can be better thinkers. We can be better communicators. We can be better listeners. We can be better. Um, we can better express ourselves. We can have larger vocabularies. Like all of these things can change about us because we can learn new things.
Indeed, like one thing that I try to keep in mind that, we both did, that I think we both did really good on was in the height of the pandemic when we were traveling, I think, to Astoria, and we were coming back and we stopped off at a gas station in somewhere in rural Washington. And we got out, went to the door of the gas station. There was a sign, please wear your mask. And we were properly masked up. And then we walk in, nobody had a mask on. The customers and the employees, none of them had a mask on. But we went in there, did our business, got we got drinks. So we got our drinks, paid for them, got back out of the car, used hand sanitizer right away.
Yeah.
But we didn't go, excuse me, where's your mask?
Right. And they didn't go, baby diaper on your face or whatever it is
Chin
that they're
diaper, yeah.
diaper. Like the things that these people like butt hurt is a terrible things to say. And chin diaper. Like they're just distasteful.
But that was a situation to where, we believed one thing, they believed another thing, and yet we were all able to live our lives without being a dick to each other, you know? And it's I try to keep that in mind, through just going forward. I thought that was a beautiful example of what it should be out there. If you do believe a certain something, you should have the freedom to be able to do the thing you believe in. And if someone else does not believe in that, they don't have to do it, but they shouldn't prevent you from doing it either.
Sure, but I think it's the spark of humanity that we have to look for in other people because it's only when we can make people a caricature that are on the other side that we can not learn and not understand things and grow.
Yeah, I mean, because in progressive media, if you had to think of Trump supporters based on only what progressive media tells you, they're the ones that have a bunch of Trump bumper stickers all over their Ford F-150. They're wearing the MAGA hat, and they're obnoxious and silly and whatnot. Whereas I would say those people represent a very small number of the overall amount of people that actually voted Trump into office. It's just, it's gotten into people's heads that that represents everybody when it's not. There are people that voted for Trump based on other reasons that aren't as nefarious, because we've talked about, how the Democrats have a beautiful way of losing battles that they should easily win. you know and this whole constant making the other side the enemy type of deal prevents people from actually saying, well, maybe if you didn't do this, you wouldn't have lost in the first damn place.
Right, like the loyalty to the candidate when the candidate is not the right candidate, for example.
Yeah, like Hillary Clinton, I would have argued that if Kamala Harris had more time as a candidate and didn't necessarily have the shackles of the Biden administration, I think she might have gotten a fairer shot. But hindsight being 2020, like based on how everything went down in 2024, Democrats were not going to win that.
Yeah, but like I was saying, that spark of humanity is what you have to get down to. That's how people like I think deal with Melania. Are things like, well, she's a mother, and mothers relate to other mothers in a different way than say people who aren't mothers.
Right.
So it's some way of identifying with people on a person to person level is what stops us from killing each other in the gas station. That we like other people stops us from murdering people that other people like, right? Like if we didn't care about people at all, what stops us from being the person that like punches somebody in the face because they've got a chin diaper on?
Exactly. Exactly. Now, one thing I really appreciate about psychology is that it doesn't just identify problems. I just imagine you with a clock, I don't agree with you, boom, boom, boom. It also looks for solutions. And one quality keeps showing up over and over again: not intelligence, not education, not even experience, curiosity. Think about the last time that someone disagreed with you. There are two ways that conversation can go. One person says, "You're wrong." Immediately, walls go up. The conversation turns into a debate. Now, imagine they ask, "That's interesting. How did you come to that conclusion?" Nothing about the disagreement has changed, but the entire tone has. One approach invites defense, the other invites reflection. Now, why do questions tend to open conversations while declarations often close them?
Because people want to talk about themselves. The thing that people like talking about the most is themselves. And so when you ask people questions, they feel like, oh, you're interested in me, which then makes them kindly towards you, right? They're going to think of you kindly because you were nice to them by asking them questions. So that sort of opens up things. Whereas if I just say, I don't believe that, that's not what I believe. We'll just have to agree to disagree. Like all of those sort of statements increase the conflict.
And yeah, those declarations can make it to where conversation will immediately come to an end. I think people do in general understand that there will be a number of things that we will agree to disagree with our fellow people out there, but we don't want to be, I guess, dismissed. And I think, having like open conversation, asking open-ended questions to somebody about why they believe what they believe, that doesn't mean you're going to walk away agreeing with them, but at the very least, you can possibly walk away with understanding their decision and be like, okay, I can get it. Still don't agree with it, but at least I understand why you came to the conclusion that you did, instead of just the blanket, you are wrong. because again, yeah, we're not ever going to be in a society where we all agree on the same things or all disagree on the same things. But in order to prevent this polarization that we are seeing here, to where you can only hang out with people who agree with everything that you do, you have to be able to have those conversations with people that you disagree with on something. I mean, it could even be something as simple as a movie, right? Like you can think a movie is the greatest movie ever made, and someone may think it's garbage, but you can still have a polite, respectful conversation that allows them to say their point without you telling them you are wrong.
Yeah, I mean, just think how rude that would be.
There are plenty of people that are rude. That there are. Now, psychologists sometimes talk about intellectual humility. It's not thinking less of yourself, it's recognizing that no matter how much we know, there's always a possibility we missed something. That idea can feel uncomfortable at first, but it can also be incredibly freeing because if you don't have to be right all the time, you can spend more time learning.
Mhm.
Now, research has consistently found that people who score higher in intellectual humility tend to be more willing to consider new evidence, listen to opposing viewpoints, and update their beliefs when the facts warrant it. What's interesting is that intellectual humility isn't about lacking confidence, it's about separating your identity from your opinions. Changing your mind doesn't mean you failed, it means you've grown. Now, do you think intellectual humility can be taught?
I think almost anything can be taught. So, yes, I think it can be taught.
I agree with that. I think it can be hard. It can be really hard, especially in the world that we live in today, with echo chambers being what they are. And echo chambers doesn't even have to be focused on the news because you can live in a professional wrestling echo chamber, for example. There are people that love WWE and think everybody else sucks. There are people that love AEW and thinks everything else sucks. Whereas there could be a healthy middle to where you say there's some things that WWE does great. There's some things that AEW does great. And let's just be happy that professional wrestling is there to make us all happy.
Right. Again, compromise. Like, we make compromises, and you don't have to be vehemently one way or another way. Like, you can like that wrestling company, even if they do things you don't like. That doesn't mean you're evil, even if the company's evil, I think.
WWE, yeah. Yeah. They've had some wacky characters there.
They sure have.
Yeah. Now, do you think is saying I don't know becoming rare these days?
I certainly have experienced that. I mean, I think my students are less able to take information and view it helpfully to learn something. And they're much more defensive, and they have their agenda, which usually has to do with grades, and they're going to pursue that. They're not going to be humble enough to say, I don't know why I got that question wrong. Can you help me understand it? As opposed to, you're wrong that I got that question wrong.
In my heart, I feel it's right. Um, Yeah, I do agree that, saying that has become rarer. I mean, I do think back on my time in retail. I think learning I don't know is actually a good thing because there are going to be times when you're working at a big box retailer where someone's going to be like, do you know where the vacuum cleaners are? And you work in the electronics department, and being able to say, I don't know, let's find out is not a bad thing.
Mhm.
Now, when it comes to computer repair, I do remember one customer comment that I had to where I told him specifically, I don't have an answer. I'm going to take a break for a quick second, ask my comrade over here the question because I think they will be able to get the answer for us. And I was able to do that promptly. It wasn't like a 30-minute break away from the customer. It was just, asking one simple question and back within 2 minutes time. But they, left a comment about, oh, they didn't know everything. They had to do this. So there are plenty of people that when they hear I don't know from somebody, like in a professional setting or whatever, they do tend to get snotty. And
Well,
just
I mean, people get snotty about whatever it is that they can because they just like to get snotty. I mean, people are assholes.
yeah, I agree. Yeah.
This is my gothiness again. I'm in a black dress. I'll have you know.
What a world. What a world.
What world? And now I have the scar. I look like a doll or something that's been sewn together.
What a doll, though. Now, one thing I've noticed is that the smartest people I know usually aren't the quickest to answer. They're often the quickest to ask another question. That really changed how I think about intelligence because when you think about it, due process asks society to practice intellectual humility. It says, let's slow down, let's hear more, let's test the evidence. Not because justice should be slow for the sake of being slow, but because human judgment is imperfect. It's almost as if the legal system was designed with human psychology in mind. Now, if everyone approached disagreements with just a little more curiosity, do you think we'd see changes beyond courtrooms in families, workplaces, and even online?
I think it would improve things in all of those areas, Tim. And, you know, some of these things are elements of nonviolent communication, which is a great method to learn to try to get out of the immediate snap judgment kind of deal.
Yeah, I think of that African American guy who makes it a point to befriend members of the Ku Klux Klan. And over the years, he became such a friend with various members that those members ended up quitting that organization and giving him their robes. I don't know the name of this gentleman off the top of my head, but by the time this episode is released, I'll make sure I have a link to the story in our social media about it. But, that guy had every reason to not want to associate with those people in any way, shape, or form. Yet, he treated them like humans. He treated them with curiosity. He heard them out. They heard him out. And something beautiful occurred because of that. And I think I would like to see more of that. Because there are too many people that are certain in their opinions that just don't allow conversation to happen. Think about like because let's go back into the 80s, and how the LGBTQ community was viewed in the 80s compared to today. And I think a lot of what allowed people to change their opinions into what we become today, even though today is far from perfect, is the fact that we heard more stories. We were able to live in people's shoes. It wasn't a situation to where people could be shunned away. Thanks to stuff like entertainment, having gay characters and stories, you were like, oh, they're not evil, they're not bad, they're just like Fred down the road, or Stella, three doors down or something like that. It allowed people to kind of open their eyes and open their minds to the fact that some of the stuff they may have heard about that community was just wrong.
Yeah. Again, finding the humanity
Yes,
is the way to connect.
indeed. Now, curiosity, it doesn't weaken our convictions at all. It strengthens them by making sure they're built on something solid. We spent this episode talking about due process as a legal principle, but maybe it's also a personal habit. Waiting, listening, questioning, being willing to admit that our first impression isn't always our best one. If more of us practice that, not just in courtrooms, but in everyday life, I wonder how many arguments would become conversations instead. Now, before we wrap up, what's one idea from today's discussion that you hope listeners carry with them this week?
I hope that people resonate with the idea of listening first and taking time to process before reacting. And you know, if I think about it as a pro-choice woman, it's hard to say that. It is hard to say I need to listen to the arguments of people that I'm already convinced that I disagree with. In order to do that, I have to be willing to change my mind. So it's like a cycle. I have to be willing to even ask the question. and I have to be willing to take the answer and actually let it influence my opinion.
And I think one thing you can keep in mind while doing that too is like, yeah, maybe if you befriend someone who is not pro-choice, by befriending them, maybe you are planting a seed to where maybe somewhere down the road they could change their mind. Or if they have kids, maybe that seed that you planted in them could be something the kids could take and build upon later.
Sure.
So kind of turning it around. Now, yeah, granted, like hardcore, pro-life people are probably not going to want to hang out with us. Darn. But the point here is that if we did take the time to hear their point of view and they took the time to hear our point of view, maybe we would find that there is more that we agree upon than not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I think that's a good time to wrap it up there. I do
Sounds
thank
good.
you for this wonderful conversation here. Now, before we wrap things up here, we do have a very special announcement about what you all are going to hear from us at Friends Talking Nerdy this coming Friday. If you are hearing this episode the day it releases, we are going to be chatting with a dear friend of yours.
That's right. I'm very excited about this.
Tell our friends at home a little about your friend.
Okay. So my friend's name is Millie Morrow, and I've been friends with her since college. And she is remarkable in her achievements. She's been a social worker, she's been a clergy person, she's been a counselor of various stripes, and she's one of the best listeners I've ever met. And she's going to be sharing with us um, ways of thinking about the world.
Yeah, I've already talked to her, so that episode is in the can. But we had a nice conversation about moral injury, about Stevie Ray Vaughan, about Spider-Man, and about a lot of other things.
That's right.
Yeah, so we cannot wait for you to give that a listen. If you're listening to this episode the day it comes out, expect it this coming Friday. If you are listening to this episode many weeks or months in the future, it'll be the next episode up on the list. Now, before we wrap up, as we've talked about over the years here on Friends Talking Nerdy, this is the time of year to where you go on vacation after vacation after vacation.
That's right.
And you just got back from the Oregon Country Fair not
I
too long ago.
sure did. I sure did.
Now,
And boy, it was a good time.
all right, what was your favorite part this year?
My favorite part this year may have been the kickball game. The kickball game was really fun. In the kickball game, the construction crew, people who build all the buildings and stuff, plays the site crew, who are the people that show up and clean up the site that's been abandoned all winter and flooded. They get rid of all of the debris and make things look pretty and nice again. And so they always play kickball on the 4th of July. And this year, Site Crew won. Word up, suck it, which is one of their little mottos. Suck it. They won, and it was super good time.
They stole that from wrestling,
What?
the Suck It.
Oh, did they?
Yeah,
Well, lots of people have said suck it.
yeah. It's from the
I can guarantee you they didn't steal it from wrestling.
no. It was made popular by wrestling, I should say.
Well, it was made popular with wrestling people by wrestling. It's been used in almost every subculture.
That's right. Suck it. So you
Whiskey
won.
bacon suck it.
So you won.
So I won.
Did you play the game?
Oh no.
Or you watched the
I
game?
watched the game.
Ah,
Yeah, so like everybody else in camp came and watched the game. So everybody was there. It was a night, 4th of July. I was kind of dressed up a little bit in my little red jacket and just watching the game, seeing all the friends. It's really fun.
all right. Any other memories this year that caused pleasant brain juices to occur?
Oh, sure, there were lots, but it's all about the sauna a lot of years, and it was this year too. The sauna and showers at the Ritz And being able to go there during the week when nobody is there in the weeks leading up to the fair and be showering with 3 other people in a facility that's made for, I don't know, 200?
200 people in one bath.
Yeah.
Sounds healthy.
Maybe it's 100. I don't know. It feels like a lot when they're full. I should find that out.
Yes, for next year. For
Yes.
next year now. Again, we will have, I'm sure, more stories about your further adventures in Burning Man, at some point later this year because you are anxiously awaiting that experience again,
I am. I'm trying to get into prep mode. Currently have just enough time to prep if I do all the things on my calendar every day I'm supposed to.
which is hard.
Very hard for me, as you know.
Yes. Well, all right. Anything else you want to say to our friends at home before we wrap things up this week?
I don't think so. I hope you enjoyed this episode.
I hope so too. I mean, if you've lasted over an hour and a half with us and you hate it, I don't know what to say at this point.
Thanks for listening, man.
Yeah, well, next week is going to start back to school / education month on Friends Talking Nerdy, and we're going to be diving into more of the mental health aspects of that. I've been showing how we've made a concerted effort to make each week about that, regardless of the topic that we're talking about. And I think we'll have some interesting conversations over the coming 5 Mondays in August.
Sweet.
All right. Well, with that, each week we will have something in this podcast space to entertain your ear holes until we meet again. We bid you adieu.
So long.
I'm right, you're wrong. Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy
On YouTube Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify,
or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Bye, friends.